Herzog's message is more, it's an insight into being human than it is necessarily a clinical diagnosis of Timothy Treadwell. Daniel teaches personality, so you can talk more into that part. Let me just say a couple things about that. You know, this is the fourth time I've seen this film, and one of the things that struck me is this is out of 100 hours of video material. And in a sense, this is sort of like a video diary that he created while spending 13 years in the Alaskan wilderness. And, you know, I just wanted to defend him in the sense that if any of us shot 100 hours of video, half of which in which we're talking, and then Werner Herzog got a hold of that, I think he would, he would find, 2 hours of craziness if he wanted to. So, I only came to this after seeing it for the fourth time. That let's think about that. It's sort of like if you wrote a secret diary your whole life, and then somebody took it and just took little excerpts from it. You can see some of these things, but I think that one of the things this film speaks to is the desire, the need to feel significant in your life, the need to have meaning to your life, the purpose to your life. He didn't have that. He was a failed actor. He got caught up in drugs, almost overdosed on, I think, a combination of cocaine and heroin. And, this is what he found. This is the meaning he found. And notice at the end of the film, Herzog is saying that this film and this footage gives meaning to his life and his death. And for Herzog, his films are trying to give meaning to his life and his death. And in a sense, the meaning is that sense of legacy, that something about this guy continues, and in fact, something about Timothy Treadwell continues through this film.
Right, so he didn't make it in Hollywood, but, he makes, Werner Herzog documentaries, but he's obviously delusional and grandiose at times, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think that part of, not everybody, of course, but some people, to find significance, they got to find something to defeat, right? Some way to triumph over some sort of evil, and he created this sense of these poachers and all of that. And by the same token, at one point in the film, he says, well, we kill like 160 of them a year. What the hell? They're going to still survive. You could argue that, what is that? Is that really the right thing to do? So, again, he's got his craziness. I don't know if anybody wouldn't go crazy spending months by yourself with a bunch of grizzly bears, but clearly he had a search because of his failures. He had a search in a way. And the ironic thing is he found a way. He got a Letterman. How many people here have been in a Letterman? Now, I think he also, what he did, these are selfies, right? This is the era of Instagram and selfies and Vine and all of this, and YouTubes and seeking fame. So he's not the only one who tries to seek fame in his life. So that's sort of my take on it. But, certainly, he took it to extremes, and that was part of who he was. And I think that one of the thoughts I had about this film is that, one of our heroes is Ernest Becker. And one of the things he said in the preface to The Denial of Death, which is sort of the basis of terror management theory, was that his parents gave him a unique gift, and that was confusion about heroism. I think that's part of what this film is about, I think, and what Herzog's trying to get across is that, guy's kind of crazy, but he also kind of did some really cool things that we just appreciated for almost 2 hours. So it's a mixed thing. So it reminds me of a film, let's say Taxi Driver, which I think is also a film about a person you could call crazy, who also, did something that could be viewed as heroic. And even American Sniper, I think there's a connection there as well. And this idea of, what is heroic and who is heroic? A lot of times it's extreme people that we end up viewing as heroic, or extreme people that end up contributing something big to the world. So you can look at it that way. Why don't you speak to some of these things?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we want to talk more about it, I think one thing that I could reinforce just on the basis of a lot of the research we've been involved with is that a lot of what Treadwell does throughout the movie, the types of statements he makes and so on, could easily be seen as exaggerations of things that we've documented in many studies that everyone does. So I can talk more about that if people are interested, but just in case we want to hear more, well, I'd like to hear more questions, so if someone has another issue they'd like to ask about it.
What are we talking?
I'm just trying to understand his anger. He was so angry, but I didn't see anybody killing bears.
Right.
Well, 160 of them were killed because of the year, supposedly.
But was it fair? Is he protecting the bear?
So I mean, that's actually a good example of what I was just referring to. Again, this is clearly an exaggeration. So, I mean, Treadwell is I think it's undeniable, he's an extreme case. I agree with what Jeff was just saying in the sense that there are many extreme cases, many people who do extreme things, who we valorize and who contribute to society. Herzog is one of them. Herzog has done very extreme things throughout the course of his life. He hasn't crossed certain boundaries, but he's crossed others. And he's someone who's sort of seen as very successful and important in society. And he certainly feels a kinship with Treadwell, whereas Treadwell, for various reasons, which I could completely sympathize with, the murder of Amy Huguenard and so on and so forth, if you want to see it that way. I mean, he is not someone who we sort of hold up as a hero, or not everyone would. But at the same time, a lot of what he does is very understandable just from sort of basic human psychodynamics. So for example, we have done studies showing that if you remind people of the fact that the world is a very scary place, that we could all be hurt in a number of ways. So we could all be hurt in car accidents on the way home tonight. We could get diseases from each other and die within the course of the week. Like, all these things are possible. It's disturbing to think about that. And we've actually found in our studies that if you remind people of the fact that the world is a scary place, and then you let them think about an enemy, someone who they don't like, whether this is someone, a political enemy like Al-Qaeda, or the presidential candidate that they didn't vote for, or whether it's a coworker who they don't like, who they feel is sort of sabotaging them. We all have people in our lives who we sort of vilify or think of as wrong, or who disagree with us. If you are reminded of a person like that, it actually makes you feel better. In our experiments, it increases your sense that you are in control of the world. And that your life is meaningful. So, admittedly, that doesn't mean that everyone goes out and, risks their lives, risks the lives of other people. It doesn't mean that everyone goes out and becomes a suicide bomber or attempts to, colonize other individuals representing different worldviews. We don't all have to do that. But nevertheless, it is a kernel in all of us to actually feel better when we have something to fight against, when we have something that we want to defeat. Normal people will show that tendency. They will get psychological boosts, so to speak, from thinking about people who they dislike. So in many ways, that's just one example of how Treadwell is an extreme case. There could be reasons related to the course of his life, related to his addictions and so on, that led him down this more extreme path. But again, what he represents are things that are actually pretty basic, that all of us do to a certain extent. We just stay within certain boundaries. And that, of course, could be seen as making all the difference. Yeah.
Along those lines, I was really surprised. I thought it was interesting that he, at the end of every sign-off from the expedition, he thanked the animals and nature for keeping him safe and protecting him. While during the expedition, he's constantly reinforcing how dangerous it is and how precipice of death. And then at the end, he feels like they were protecting him, which doesn't seem based in reality or rational at all. But it's sort of this give and take of reminding himself about death, and then at the end, feeling like it was actually protecting him in some way.
Well, it's his claim to heroism, is right, the dangers, is he's doing something, and he was doing something very courageous. Right? I'm not going out there, right? I don't think any of us are. So he's doing something very courageous, and he wanted to point to that. It wasn't so much that they were protecting him. They were giving him purpose, right? He didn't really use the word protection. He says they gave him his life. They gave him meaning. They gave him a purpose, and he exaggerated the need for himself in order to feel heroic, that he had purpose. I don't think those Grizzlies really needed him. I think they're pretty good at protecting themselves in general. No, he did, but he did. He went to places and talked to children and showed. And I've seen a couple of the other clips that Herzog didn't show, and a lot they're quite interesting. And he takes more of an educational tone in a lot of them, and he shows observations of them and how they would dig for clams and how they would get the clam shells open and stuff. So there were a lot of educational aspects to his videos that didn't necessarily get put in his film because Herzog wanted to make some other points.
And I would also just quickly add that if we want to think about things that humans have talked about as simultaneously being protectful of them and watching over them, but also capable of destroying them at any moment, God, Allah, the Hindu floaty thing, I mean, that's essentially how people have always talked about their deities. So I mean that kind of ambivalence, of seeing something as a source of ultimate power in the universe is in some ways preferable to seeing the universe as this indifferent place that Herzog claims to think it is.
Do you think that his teaching with kids kind of promoted his sense of heroism, and do you think that the attraction of that heroism or that kind of heroism was attractive to kids? Like kids just love death, and they're wrapping their brains around that. I'm kind of interested.
Well, I don't know that he emphasized the death component per se. He gave the bears names. Kids are attracted to what's powerful, right? Kids my son was little. His big thing was could a shark defeat a Tyrannosaurus Rex? I mean, he was all about why? Because they're trying to figure out power categories. So anything that's powerful is fascinating to us, right? We were fascinated by watching the bears go at it, right? Because they represent power and they represent danger. So there's appeal to that for kids and adults. I don't think there's any doubt that it seemed like the only way he connected with people with this was with kids, and kind of try to spread the word of the beauty of these animals and that they should be protected, whether it was necessary and how much could affect, hard to say.
Back there.
Did he go out in the wilderness first and then discover the affinity for bears, or did he go out intending to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have read, if you're interested in them, by the way, I started, in anticipation, I started going on the internet looking for information, and I realized that you could spend about 3 months just reading about Timothy Treadwell related topics on the internet. Didn't go quite that far, but I did spend some hours on it. I don't recall coming across exactly how it got started. I think that's a really good question. I would speculate that he somehow, took a trip up there. And there are people who take people on trips to go watch bears, usually at a very safe distance, but they do that. So maybe he got the idea there. Okay, here's something. Here's a way I can have purpose. But I should know that. I'm sorry, I don't know the specifics of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And one thing, of course, that's very striking about this movie is, as Jeff was sort of alluding to earlier, is it's very much Treadwell creating this identity for himself and sculpting a story about himself. And so, for example, he tells this kind of apocryphal, sort of mythic story about vowing to abandon, alcoholism and so on in service of the bears. So, it might be in fact quite difficult to sort of figure out those details about how it actually happened, because he, of course, was very committed to telling a particular story about how it happened.
I did read that he learned a lot. He was very stupid when he first went out in the first season, and he learned over the first few years. But he also, I believe in the first few years, he actually brought bear repellent. So there's like a pepper spray. And so most serious scientists who study bears, they bring this pepper spray, and they also use electric fences to protect themselves. And he started out using at least the bear repellent. I'm not sure if he used electric fences, and eventually got rid of that. I think it's part of it to try to feel more heroic about it. Yeah.
Can both of you talk, because you seem to have really different perspectives in some ways, can you talk about relating Herzog's work over time and what's happened with video and how it's evolved into reality TV?
Yeah, well, Daniel is much more an expert on Herzog than I am, but he's made many, many documentaries. So go ahead.
I mean, I think that's a great question. To some extent, some of what Jeff was saying earlier, I think is a good one way of thinking about that. Just in the case of this particular film, Grizzly Man, it is kind of striking to me, thinking about just about a decade ago when it came out, how a lot of what Treadwell was doing has in many ways become much more normative. So in some ways it is like he's out there, doing Instagram type stuff, selfie type stuff. He's editing his life in a way that many more people have sort of acquired the technology to kind of easily do. And it is a big part of sort of modern creation of identity, having the kind of tools to be able to do that. What I really like about your question, and what makes it sort of difficult to answer, is that Herzog himself definitely has been at the forefront of, at least in the era of film, this kind of blurring of fiction and reality. So, he is known for repeatedly, stating that his documentary, he doesn't like to distinguish actually between the two, between feature films and documentaries. And we sort of talk about him now that he's become more and more popular through films like this as sort of changing documentary or pushing the boundaries of it by, potentially moving it in a direction towards fiction or something like that. But he's never really tried to distinguish between the two because he thinks it's all life. One thing that really struck me when I first saw this movie was how much it felt like a Herzog movie. I think that's one of the most impressive things about it. And of course, there are several sequences that are directed by Herzog, the interviews and so on. And those are a good example of his approach where the stories that people tell in his documentaries are often very staged. I really like the scenes with the coroner in this movie. They have a very strange feeling to them, and he kind of lingers on him in odd ways, and there are times where the coroner seems to be being, he's doing something that he thinks is theatrical, and then Herzog kind of lingers on it too long to reveal the artifice, and Herzog will openly admit this. He doesn't try to hide it, and similarly, he's constantly sort of pursuing Treadwell and kind of revealing the artifice in Treadwell. It's not something that Herzog's ashamed of. He thinks, fact, fiction, again, it's all life. It's all some attempt to illuminate what's happening to us, and in many ways, I'll try to stop here because I could go on forever, but I think Herzog has talked about and very much exemplifies what I would call a kind of Nietzschean idea of truth. So he is very committed to the idea that, for example, things like cinema verite or, sort of movies that try to be close to life, he often finds that not actually representative of truth. He thinks there are these sort of deep emotional truths to human experience, and however we reveal them, that's what's important. It doesn't matter if you have to stage some scene and claim that it's real in order to get people to have the reaction that represents that kind of deeper truth. That's something that he's very much after in his films.
Yeah. You mentioned that your research talks about people needing something to defeat, but isn't it possible for you also to triumph without somebody losing? In other words, win-win or whatever. I mean, game theory seems to say that there are situations where maybe it's just somebody losing less than someone else, but not kind of being defeated. So I'm just a little confused about that notion, because in this it doesn't appear as if, although he certainly gets defeated by death, but that all of us will. And it's just, which way did we go out? I think he probably wasn't that upset about himself going out that way. It seemed like he was pretty upset about Amy going out that way. But,
Well, I think from our research, and I guess from history, you'd say that heroically triumphing over evil, it gives the greatest sense of righteousness and the greatest sense of power and greatness to people, and that causes a lot of problems. That's what people gravitate toward. Is there a kinder, gentler way? William James, 100 years ago, talked about trying to find a moral equivalent of war, something that we can battle, that we can all agree is worth battling against. So environmentalists, it's like, pollution and people, not supporting sustainability, blah, 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 there's still an enemy out there. So I think it's difficult not to, to feel heroic and to feel like you matter without you opposing something. It doesn't have to be another person or another group of people, but it has to be something.
I will quickly say, just because people seem to be, so people are interested in how crazy is Treadwell, I guess, is sort of a simple way to put it. And I mean, one thing that is definitely true from research on differences in personality is, there are meaningful differences in the extent to which people feel secure in their identity and the extent to which they are somewhat comfortable with trying to entertain paradoxical aspects to existence or a certain amount of uncertainty in their lives, not necessarily needing to have a black and white view of the world. There are people, perhaps it could be argued at times that Herzog is one of these people. You could probably argue the other way too, but there are certainly people out there, often artists, who are able to maintain perhaps a less destructive kind of relationship with immortality, with trying to find significance in ways that don't necessarily involve bringing destruction on others. Although, of course, those people, artists in particular, often bring destruction on themselves. And you could sort of, I guess you could interpret Treadwell either way.
Yeah, just a comment about what you mentioned about how crazy is he and things. I could be off about this, but certainly he's extreme, as you mentioned, and I think he's got more courage than most of us to go to where he's going and do what he's doing. But I don't get an image painted of him as being quite as delusional as some people I hear some people say and things, because I think I'll bet if pressed, and this is totally speculation, that he would probably admit to the fact that the Bears were more important for him than he was to them. Even though he does say, I'm here to save the Bears, he also, just says, I love them very much, and he's clear that they've given meaning to his life. And I don't think that's, as you mentioned, entirely different than what most of us do by making meaning out of the jobs we do, the relationships we have, and making them be really important to us. But if pressed, maybe recognize that relationship is more important to me than if I were gone, this job would carry on, this everything would carry on. And so I sort of was feeling like he's actually not that delusional. He's courageous for what he's doing, and he thinks if there is a threat to the Bears, he'll be there to confront it, but that really they're saving his life. And I got the impression that if pressed, he might agree with that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I find it interesting that a lot of people reacted negatively to Treadwell because he got eaten by a bear.
Right.
It's like, that's probably how he wanted to go.
Oh, yeah.
Now, and I think he would have been upset by the fact that they came and killed the bear. They actually came and killed 2 bears, by the way. I don't think that was clear from the movie, but they killed 2 bears. And another side note to this is that the bear that they found Treadwell and Amy in, parts of them in, was a 1,000-pound, 28-year-old bear. But some, I was reading online, some bear experts suggested that might not have been the bear that actually killed them. Because big bears often push small bears out of the way and eat what the small bears have killed. So it's sort of interesting that they felt the need, because he was killed, they had to go kill a bear. Right? Like when 9/11 happened, we had to go and find some enemy to kill, whether it was the right enemy or not. I think we saw that happen with the killing of the bear. And they actually killed another bear that was kind of roaming close by when they went to kill the bear that supposedly killed him.
Well, part of what I found a little delusional, I actually lived there for 36 years and have camped out there, and the person who talked about killing 130 bears is in Katmai Island, which is very different. This is a protective, Katmai National Park actually protects the bears, and I've never heard of a poacher coming down there. So I think his whole idea of protecting them.
Yeah, no, he definitely exaggerated that a lot. Now there was a little bit of footage of evidence of poaching among the footage, but not a lot. And you're right, the bears are very protected there. And those 2 people were the first 2 people killed in 85 years by bears in that area.
But keep in mind, his mission is more than protecting. He says, I protect the bears, I study the bears, and I teach about the bears. So I think there's a broader mission than just protecting.
That's true, but he was, I mean, most people agree that he was exaggerated
Yeah.
in the threat of the poaching, absolutely.
And I would be remiss because my father is a biologist at ASU, and he would chastise me for not sort of standing up on behalf of naturalists and biologists who, you know, things like this happen to people like the crocodile hunter as well, right, Steve Irwin. You know, these are people who, there are other people who live, I guess, much less glamorous lives, you know, trying to study these things in ways that society approves of. And you could argue that those people who sort of do the work of, you know, documenting the animals, staying out of their way, you know, they're making a contribution which is in many ways going to be documented and is perhaps going to be more significant than the type of stuff that Steve Irwin and Timothy Treadwell do. I mean, they're you know, they're doing the work that is eventually going to potentially convince governments, you know, that certain animals need to be registered as endangered species and so on and so forth. So again, it's not glamorous, it's not giving them this kind of dramatic, heroic sense of identity, but they find great meaning in it and just approach it in, again, a way that sort of respects certain boundaries.
It sounded like he knew that it would only be in his death that his message would come across. Do you think his own self-fulfilling prophecy of getting eaten, do you think it takes away from his message at all?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think it's interesting how much this movie is focused on his death, more than the things, you know, the things that he did. And so, you know, we do, you know, the death, the woman in the movie said death will create a sense of drama that will make his message, in a sense, more well known. And that certainly happened. He became more famous by being eaten by bears, maybe, than he did by living with them.
So I just,
Yeah.
I mean, along that lines, it seems to me like it's actually dangerous for him to be showing these films to kids and encouraging the kids to think something reasonably approachable. And if his death was really that meaningful, the kids should know about it. You know, the kids should know this is the end result of what happened with the Grizzly Man. Because these, you know, it doesn't work. Or it doesn't work a percentage of the time. And here's the reality.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's another point. It's really not the safest way to go about studying bears. He made that pretty clear, ultimately. But, you know, if you're sitting there teaching kindergartners about bears, I don't think we're all that worried, and parents are going to be worried that your 6-year-old's going to take off for a
But
lesson.
he's showing, am I wrong? He was showing footage of himself with the bears and talking about how he was dealing with the bears. That seems really inappropriate for
Yeah.
to show.
I actually don't know, and certainly the film doesn't indicate exactly how he was framing the videos and what videos he was showing. I'm sure he wasn't showing videos of him raving about the park service to the kids. We don't know for sure, but like I said, I've gone to YouTube and found other videos by him that look more like a nature film, with him narrating as an educator about the way bears go about foraging for food and stuff like that. So,
Well, that's why it's really important to look at this as a work of Herzog's, not as a work of Treadwell, because with 2 out of 100 hours, you're talking about somebody choosing and framing whatever it is that they want to frame.
Absolutely.
That's really critical.
Absolutely. Although Herzog goes out of his way during the movie to say, look, this is amazing footage, and that this is the positive part of the positive of what he did. He did show these bears in their natural world.
Yeah, I'm interested in the psychology of how we find identity in these exaggerated obsessions, and sometimes madness versus obsession becomes very hazy. If you have somebody who's doing Mount Rushmore, or did the Valley of the Moon, or you have people who are building their home out of, you know, beer cans, and they never use any other. But they'll do this for like decades to be totally obsessed in that, or they'll fills our house full of those things that you step on that talk, you know, and you clap your hand and things. I've been in houses where that's the whole house is just where they're obsessed with that. And they create this identity that somehow maybe lowers anxiety over time. I'm not sure the psychology behind that, but Edward Curtis with photographing Native Americans, he threw his whole life into that for decades, and there was artifice within it, and there's all this controversy that we now look at it as being something positive on some level. There's a Native American controversy about it, but we all sort of microcosms our own lives maybe have these things, and I'm interested in, are there backgrounds that people who come to this or bring their own psychological issues with the way they're upbringing or things that happen that make people sometimes have more of an exaggerated sense of that and then live their lives this way by finding meaning in these exaggerated obsessions?
Yeah, I don't think we have a full answer to that, but you know, the people we're influenced by would suggest that most of us find conventional routes to feel heroic in our daily lives. We can be, you know, a good parent. We can be a good friend to people. We can be a good lawyer, doctor, business person, accountant, whatever we, you know, paths we choose. So most of us find those conventional paths. One of the interesting things is the extreme people are often the most idolized and arguably the most influential. The best, Michael Jordan was known, he wasn't just a talented guy who could jump high. He worked harder than anybody else. He was obsessed with being the best. And sometimes he acted like an asshole because of that, but he was the most lauded. A great violinist practices hours every day, his or her whole life, on that instrument. That's extreme. That could be viewed as crazy from a perspective that doesn't value classical music, let's say. Most people choose conventional routes of one sort or another. Sully and I, we write articles and hope that someday somebody will actually read them. That's an occasional book. So everybody has their way, but it's certainly a good question. Why do some people get more extreme, more obsessive? And a lot of times when they do, sometimes it causes great evil, and sometimes it causes what we end up judging as great good. So that's where I'm going.
Yeah, and I think I would just add that a psychoanalyst, Otto Rank, made this argument that that some people feel more anxiety, and this can have to do with aspects of your temperament, the way you're born, your genetics, the way you're raised. Perhaps you are insecurely attached to your caregivers because of the way that they treat you early on. There can be a variety of reasons, but there are some people who are perhaps more susceptible to the anxiety that we all face. We know we're going to die someday. We know it could happen at any point, and so on. And Otto Rank argued that there are some people who are so afraid of death that they actually end up being unable to live because they're sort of dominated by that anxiety, however it manifests. And I will say that I think it's pretty clear from Treadwell's statements in the film and what he did with his life that I think he was afraid. I think he was afraid of death. He was afraid of his own insignificance. And so he really got off on feeling like he was championing over death, that he was surviving in these harsh environments. And I think Herzog is the same way. I think Herzog is a person who we could see as deeply heroic. He's the type of guy who's been shot during an interview and just keeps talking, and yet at the same time, I think there's sort of a deep fear of potential insignificance in him. This is another one of the many stories about Herzog, but supposedly at one point he heard that a friend of his was dying in another country in Europe, and he decided to walk to that person to visit her one last time. And he was convinced, just like Treadwell is convinced he can bring the rain down, that if he walked this whole way, which was going to take him like 2 months, the person would stay alive, and that at least the person would live until he got there. And allegedly that's what happened. He walked across 2 countries over several months and first stayed alive. I think Herzog, for all his sort of risk-taking, is someone who actually does have kind of a fairly deep fear of potential human insignificance. And so I think one answer to your question is that for whatever reason, genetic part of our upbringing, some people are more susceptible to that than others, which actually causes them to do rather extreme things.
danger and death hanging over this film, and certainly with Treadwell constantly reminding us of that. I think he was also really motivated by a genuine and really deep love for nature. I haven't heard anybody really talk about that, because he kept telling the bears how much he loved them and how he loved the fox, and you really feel that. And so I could see why he was really angry at the Park Service and potential poachers, because, you know, we all see what's happening to nature. And so, yeah, you know, he was doing this daring thing, and no matter, you know, what kind of personality or psychological problems he had, I think he was, you know, largely motivated by his love of nature, and saw it as a huge privilege hanging out there with the bears. I mean, I love nature too, but you're not going to catch me probably hanging around grizzly bears or any other ferocious creature.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's a very fair perspective. I don't think it's Herzog's perspective, because he wants to push that, you know, he loves the bears, and the bears couldn't care less about him, was kind of what he was trying to convey. And you know, that happens. I mean, it was an unrequited love.
Do we need to wrap up? Yeah. I mean, I would just, if I had a final thought, it would be, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's actually something that Herzog also would endorse. And it's one potential, I don't know if you could view it as a failure, it's a very complex film, but it's one way in which his emphasis on trying to understand Treadwell's psychology in the film, I think could potentially undermine or cause us not to recognize the importance of what you just said. I think there are many aspects of the film that are deeply beautiful, things that Treadwell shot, things that Herzog shot. Herzog clearly finds redemption in nature. And he talks about that, even though he sees it as this chaotic, indifferent world, he also loves it. He thinks it's beautiful. And I think you're totally right. I mean, it's quite possible, I don't doubt for a moment that Treadwell experienced some kind of rebirth and some sort of cure from his addiction and his, you know, life of insignificance by being out in nature. So, I mean, I think it's a complex story like anything else in human experience, but I think that's something that we shouldn't, you know, dismiss just because of other aspects of his psychology.
So it's a love story.
Thank you very much for having us here.